I think we can all agree that isn't looking too great. But the good news is, in this episode, we're going to fix it. But in fairness, it used to look a lot worse. So previously I had to cut the quarter panel to get access to the longitudinal. And then you can see here I've done quite a lot of prep work, you know, grinding and cutting out the worst of the rot. So in one of the previous episodes we did some work in this area and reinforced it with 2mm thick steel. And that gave a lot of strength back to this longitudinal because, believe it or not, if this rust goes through unchecked and it's not strengthened, then the whole car can bend in the middle like a banana. One way to tell is your shut line, so can you open and shut the doors properly, or do they start to bind? But yeah, literally the car starts to sag and they can end up with the underneath of the car in the middle, the belly part, on the floor. And that brings us back to today's target, which is to fix this passenger side longitudinal. And the rust gets so bad in this area that owners of these Porsche 914s refer to this area as the hellhole. I kid you not. So let's dive in there and have a look at some stuff. So this is effectively a big box section here. Normally this would be all boxed over as well. So this is only exposed at the moment because we're in the middle of some repairs across this top edge. And if we look up, and I'll show you as best as I can, this is all untreated in here. So it's just bare metal, and it's like this when they leave the factory. And as you can see, a bit of rust has crept into there. It's not bad, but while we've got this open, I thought that it might be a good idea to do a little bit of rust treatment in there. Hydrate 80 is my go-to rust converter. You know, it's brilliant stuff. So what I'm proposing to do is just get a brush and then just reach as far as I can, maybe even put the brush on a stick, and then just apply it as much as I can. Soon, we're going to have our new replacement panel. Speaking of which, here it is. So this replacement panel is ready to be cut to size and then put in. But first, it'd be great if we could convert some of this rust, and goes back to like a black iron, and it gives it a lot of protection. This actually leaves a bit of a residue behind, which helps prevent more rust in the future. So, right, let's get to it. So in the end I didn't have to use the paintbrush on a stick, but it was pretty awkward, but it was just wide enough for me to reach up in there with the brush, which I had to keep refreshing with more fluid all of the time, get it all painted down and just convert as much of that rust to black iron as possible. And I continued all the way down to the bottom, basically everything I could see, as you can see here too. So we're just measuring up here, and then we're going to cut this panel back and leave it a little bit oversized, and then once we can get it in place, then we'll do a second trim more to the size it needs to be. And we're just going to use tape now that we've marked that up, and that will allow us to have a line to work to when we're doing the cutting on the bench. You ready?
Yeah.
You mentioned it's double skinned, so we're going to be here a while.
Yeah.
So that looks alright, but I have to cut quite deep.
Yeah, well if I was you, I'd cut from this way, because the way the grinder works, it pulls its way down in instead of trying to force its way out.
Yeah, okay.
So it turned out to be a good tip from my dad, because being mindful of which way the blade's rotating can make it work harder for you, with a lot less bucking and kicking.
So that's it, is it?
We'll go offer it up.
So we're just doing the first offer up.
So at this edge here, it just has to tuck inside.
Yeah, just
So we might have to do a little cut just in there.
just notch that just a little bit.
Yeah. And then it'll be able to slide 10mm further, won't it?
Yeah, it will be.
So it's almost on, isn't it? But just a little bit too long, is it?
Just this right here is catching, holding it out right now.
Do you want to mark it just while we've got it up here?
I know where it's at, right there.
And then we'll just notch it out.
Just take it off right there.
So once we got the panel the size that we wanted it to be, we clamped it in place, and then we're cutting up the left hand side, and basically that's cutting the panel behind. And that's going to enable us to do a butt weld along this. But what we've actually decided to do along the top edge is a lap joint. And it just depends on how much access we got that's determining what kind of joint we're going to use. So here we're just going along the top edge of the patch panel and I'm punching some holes through it. And because it's going to overlap onto the panel that's on the car, that means I can put plug welds through and they'll be nice and strong and we'll be able to do some other welding too. And here's a bit of close up so you can see exactly what's going on. There's going to be a lot of plug welds. And now Dad's just cleaning up the metal on the car because we want to have a nice clean surface for welding to.
So I just put a couple of screws in there just to make sure that metal's being held flat, and that will make it easier to weld.
We've done a lot of the plug welds already, but you saw a lot of them in previous videos. But what I'm doing here is adding some extra tacks along the leading edges. Basically, the more welding the better to give extra strength. And then we went ahead and did some grinding around all of the edges, basically just to tidy things up. But not too much, because you can actually weaken plug welds by grinding too much of the head off of it. And all of this is going to be hidden behind the external panel when we put it back on again. If you feel like you've been missing out on plug welds, here's a few for you. We just had the inside edge on the curved part that's just in front of the wheel to do, so just working on the back edge of the pinch weld here.
So as you can see, the longitudinal is looking a lot better now, but we've got some finishing off work to do in this area now. So let's have a look at that. So this just here that you can see, that's actually the jacking point, but this is the old panel that used to be in place there. And as you can see, I cut it out. Oh, in fact, it used to go on like that. But the only bit that we need now is this. But also on the front of this was like an extra reinforcing plate. And so once this peg, whatever we want to call it, is welded in, then this reinforcement plate goes on the outside, and it was welded all around the side, but then on the center bits it welded onto the peg as well. But first we need to get this cut off of the old sheet metal piece so that we can weld it into the middle there, and then also I'll clean all this up so that then when we're ready it can go over it just like that. Yeah, so we're just gonna get this into the vise now and then cut that peg off so that we can weld it onto the car. Yeah, so it's a bit awkward because what we need to do is cut down there, don't we?
Yeah, which is what I'll do from this side. I'll cut this side, then flip it over and cut the other side, I think.
Yeah, sounds a good idea.
Okay, so now that we've got the jacking peg off, we're just going to grind off any excess weld or steel that's on the side of it, and that'll give us a really nice surface for welding it back onto the new piece that's on the car. So apologies, the footage for all of the welding got corrupted, so I don't have it. But just to give you a recap, we welded the lifting peg into the longitudinal here. And as discussed earlier, we dropped this square plate over it. And then the square plate has plug welds all around the outer side, which you can see me grinding back here. And then where it touches the square lifting peg in the middle, you can put quite a big thick bead of weld onto there. So you can see there's quite a little bit of material on here, some of which I'm going to have to grind back to make it look more tidy. But the key thing is that it needs to be nice and strong, because you actually lift up the car using the factory provided the jack using this lifting peg.
Okay, so I've just finished editing up the footage for the Porsche 914 restoration longitudinal repair, and I've realised I'm only on 10 minutes of footage, and you guys have been really patient waiting for the next installment of this video series to come out. So I've scouted around for some bonus footage for you guys, and I think I've found something that you're going to find interesting. So you remember me saying that this is one half of the hellhole repair? And that's because the problem starts in the engine bay, and if left unchecked it comes all the way through here. Well, earlier on in the project I did some work in the engine bay. I removed some panels that were in the way of this corner inside, and I did a bit of experimenting of different ways of removing panels, you know, spot weld hole saws and special chisels and all sorts of stuff. So let me show you where the action's going to be taking place, and then we'll jump to that footage and see what you think to it. Really need to do a tidy up. Okay, so here we are, we're at the back of the car. We're going to jump into the engine bay and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the hellhole area, and somewhere around here the battery tray would normally sit, and battery acid and water runs down and it collects and it rots out here. And this is actually the back of the longitudinal, which you've seen us doing all the work on. Well, normally there would be a panel here and it'd be covering this corner, and it'd run round and across here, I believe, and across here. And so I've taken that panel out ages ago. I didn't show it in previous videos in order to get access to this. And then of course you did see me cleaning all this up and rust treating it, and I still have a patch to put in this corner. But let's jump to removing this panel and the different tools and techniques that you can use for that. Okay, so this is the hellhole area before I did any work, and the panel's still in place. And you can see it's still quite a mess in this corner, the bulkhead and the inner longitudinal. And now if we work our way forward on this panel, it runs backwards towards the back of the car. And it spot welded at quite a lot of different intervals, running all the way back. And actually the engine seal runs onto this piece as well, you know, with the car being air cooled. And then as we go around this corner here, you can see that the panel we're going to remove was tucked behind another panel. So that makes things a little bit trickier. So a little bit of work to do in this area. And then finally going around to the wheel arch side, you can see that it goes, you know, round towards where the wheel is, and there's more spot welds in this area too. So the first thing we need to do is get the paint cleared off so we can see exactly where the spot welds are. And then I've got a few different tools and techniques I'm going to use on them to try to remove this panel. Okay, and so now you can see the exact locations of the spot welds much more easily. So the next step is just to center punch in the middle there, and then I'll be ready to drill that out. So I'm just going to use this tool. It's like a little hole saw really, so it cuts around the outer edges of the spot weld, and it has a sprung return tip in the middle. So you just line the tip up with the center punch mark that you did earlier, and then you push it up against the spot weld. And once I've got it started like that, then I tend to just put a little bit of cutting compound on the blade. It'll make it last a little bit longer. And it's worth checking back regularly to make sure you're not cutting further than just the front piece of steel. Okay, so that's the first two drilled out. And I'll come to these other two later on. But what I want to do is start to peel that edge back, and then it might allow me to get a separating tool behind these, so we'll see. But round the other edge, there's a bit more welding, but I'm going to need to get the flat wheel or a grinding disc in there to take that edge off. Okay, so I'm just going to use the air chisel to separate these two panels. And it's probably worth mentioning that most air chisels have an adjustment on them here. And so this is set on quite a gentle setting at the moment. Well, as gentle as these things can get. You see? And then what I can do is adjust it up a little bit. So you can see that's quite severe now. You have to be really careful because you can distort the piece of metal that you're planning on leaving there to weld the new panel to. So it's always a good idea to start on a gentle setting first. And then work your way up a little bit if you need to. Okay, and so now I've got that separated a bit. I've just selected one of my spot weld separating tools, and this one has a bit of an angle on it, which means I'll be able to get in nicer there. And also they have a solid shaft that runs all the way through. You literally just get it in there and then you can tap the back edge, and I should be able to just chase these spot welds down and separate them all, but we'll see, huh? With those spot welds broken on the outside, I can turn my attention to inside the engine bay. And here I'm just going to cut through a part of the panel so that I can work on it as a separate piece. And also to give me access to some spot welds that are just a little bit higher up.
And now, because I can get under the leading edge of the flap, I'm going to use the spot weld breaker chisel in exactly the same way and see if I can break these 3 or 4 spot welds here. And then that section of the panel should come off. And actually that technique works so well, I'm just going to keep rolling with it. So I'm going to use the wire wheel to clear off any paint and rust so I can see where the spot welds are. And then the spot weld hole cutter, if I can't get under the leading edge of the flap with the chisel, just to give me the space that I need, and then come along with one of the chisels, and I've got a few different in the set depending on what the situation is. And it seems to be breaking those spot welds pretty well. And actually I found that cutting off a section of a panel where possible did make things more manageable. You were working with a small piece then instead of a huge one, because as you're chiseling it off then it gets a little bit distorted and bent, and it gets worse the bigger the panel is. And I just worked my way along doing exactly the same thing. But here you can see I'm using the L-shaped chisel. It just gave me better access, and all of the ones in the set have a different use, so I'm finding the set really useful. Eventually I got the whole panel out that's under the battery tray, and with a bit of wire wheel cleaning up, that's pretty much brought us back up to date with where you've seen the cars at now. And it gave us the access that we needed to do the repairs on the top of the longitudinal and on the bulkhead that I showed you earlier.
So let's just do a quick summary of what tools I use, and I'll tell you what worked best for me and hopefully what would work best for you as well. Okay, so starting with wire wheels. When I started off, this little wheel was really battered, and it's looking even worse for wear now, so it's not going to last much longer. But it started off as one of these, and the benefit of this is, well, one, it goes into a drill, so if you don't have access to an angle grinder, then you know that gives you a good option. The other is, it's not that severe. So if I'm taking paint off or just some light rust, and especially if I don't want to damage the panel, then I find these really good. And the drill has more control, at least this one does, because I have speed control on this, and so that gives you some options for controlling how harsh you're being. One thing to keep in mind is this one started off as one of these, so all these bristles have had to go somewhere, and I didn't talk about it at the time, but you really need eye protection. So I wear safety glasses and a visor when I'm using this, and of course wearing your gloves as well. Now, you didn't see these in action today. I use these for getting off really heavy rust, and to be honest, of the two of them, it's this one that I find best. So it's a knotted wire, and it just eats through rust. And of course, if it's on an angle grinder, the angle grinder goes at quite a high speed. But bear in mind, you know, what I was saying just a minute ago, it'll be a lot harsher on the panel than this little wire wheel. So let's talk about spot weld drills. So you didn't see these in action today, and the reason you didn't is because I've used these quite a lot in the past, and as soon as I went to using this, and I'm calling them a spot weld hole saw, is these are much more efficient. Not only do they cut faster, but they're just so much easier to use, and I think that in the long run these will be more cost effective as well. So even if you get a cobalt one of these, which can be quite expensive, then I found that they do tend to burn out even if you're using a cutting compound. And also they start to get quite slow, and you find yourself pushing harder and harder, and if you're not careful you can actually just cut right through both panels. So I mentioned cutting compound a minute ago, and this is literally one of the best cutting compounds, not very expensive, that you can get in Europe.
And it really will keep your spot weld drills and cutters alive for much longer, and it will make them cut faster when you are using them.
Okay, so I used all of these, removing that panel. The air chisel, you probably noticed, I used very sparingly, so I only used it for one small part. I think from using all of these tools, even though the air chisel is quite adjustable for power at the back, I find it quite an inaccurate tool. It's really hard to have control over it, you know, exactly how much force you're putting on the panel, bearing in mind that usually at least one of the panels you're trying to leave it undamaged as much as possible so you can re-weld back to it again. So I will use this, especially where I can't swing a hammer, in order to kind of tap at the back of these. But these have become my spot weld removal tool of choice, really. And for me, these are a game changer because I didn't have these when I took my floor pan out, and it seemed to take me ages. And I think with these, I'd have done it in half the time. Okay, so that's it. That's the Porsche 914 passenger side longitudinal replacement done, and another step in the restoration journey complete.
And I hope you found the information about panel removal and the tools to do it useful. I'll put some links in the description if you're interested.
So I hope you're enjoying the content, and if you are, then please give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and maybe I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye for now.